Amanda,
And I'm Kristen.
and welcome to Growing Up ABC.
Today we're going to be talking about some of our experiences growing up ABC. So a little bit about myself. I'm Kristen. I'm a third generation Chinese Canadian. So this means that both of my parents were born and raised in Canada. My grandpa on my dad's side actually owned a Chinese restaurant in the Yukon before moving down to Vancouver to retire. So yeah, my grandparents worked really hard in order to give their grandchildren and children better lives. And look, like I guess it's paid off. I'm in university. We're all doing really well, so they've made a lot of sacrifice for us. And it was definitely not easy for them to come to a new country and learn a new language. Like that's never hard for anyone. So I'm very appreciative for all the sacrifices that they've made. And some other background on my family. When my great grandfather came to North America, he originally ended up in San Francisco, but then he passed away, and my grandpa and my great grandmother actually moved up to Canada. So I could have been American, but I'm Canadian. I'm actually quite thankful for that. And yeah, all of my immediate family on both sides resides in North America, so we've all kind of immigrated over here. I don't have any family left over in China. Um, in terms of what part of China I'm from, I'm Cantonese, but can't speak it, which I think is a really common problem among ABCs. I think a lot of us have lost the ability to speak our home country's language. So yeah, I'm unable to speak Cantonese. I can only order a little bit of dim sum. That's as far as that goes. But yeah, so growing up, I definitely felt a disconnect from my Chinese heritage, as both myself and my parents can't speak Cantonese, so we speak English at home. I grew up eating, traditional foods, and I practiced some of the Cantonese traditions, but as a third generation ABC, my connection to Cantonese culture is quite weak, I would say, compared to a first generation. But yeah, on to Amanda.
Yeah, so I'm a second generation Chinese Canadian. So that means that I have one parent that was born in Canada, and then the other parent was born outside of Canada. So my dad was actually born in Canada, and my mom was born in China, but her and her brother and mom and dad moved to Hong Kong. So my grandma and grandpa wanted to move to Canada so that my mom and her brother could have better education opportunities and just a better quality of life. But it was extremely expensive to go through the whole process. So my grandpa actually took a job working on a fishing boat in Venezuela, and he worked as a chef on the boat as well. And he actually learned how to speak Spanish, which is really interesting. So he still speaks some Spanish now. So he speaks English, Cantonese, and Spanish too. So even working in Venezuela wasn't enough money to bring everyone over. So my grandpa's brother actually had a grocery shop in Canada. So my grandpa went to Canada to work in this grocery store, and he worked there for a few years. And then he finally had enough money to bring over my mom, her brother, and my grandma. And then so they came over to Canada, and then they finally got enough money to bring over my great grandma. So they were separated for a little bit. But my mom ended up coming over to Canada when she was 7 years old. So again, my mom, her brother, and both my grandparents didn't know how to speak English. So they had to navigate moving from Hong Kong to Canada, not having much money, and also figuring out how to speak English. So when they came to Canada, they still did not have much money because it was very expensive to sponsor someone and to come over to Canada. So my grandpa, he worked at a fishery, he worked at a lumber mill, and he was also a chef. And my grandma, she worked a bunch of jobs. She was a chambermaid. She also worked shucking seafood, and she worked in a clothing factory. And like you were saying, it's really interesting because I also can't speak Cantonese. My mom can speak some of it, mostly just to communicate with my grandparents, but my dad speaks very, very little. And growing up as a second generation, it's been a really interesting life experience because I feel like I have one foot in both of these different life worlds, because I have these strong ties to this story about, my grandma and my grandpa and my mom's brother, coming here to Canada. But then at the same time, my dad was born here in Canada, and I've lived in Canada my whole life. So I really have these two different worlds that I'm kind of in the middle of, which has been really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of us feel as ABCs. I think that's like a very common shared experience. So we want to talk a little bit about why we chose ABC as the name for the, or growing up ABC for the show. So ABC is actually an abbreviation for American Born Chinese. Now this includes like all like North American born Chinese as well. It's not just for, Americans in the United States. It's like a pretty highly recognized term within the Asian community. So yeah, it's inclusive of all North Americans, which is what we are. We're Canadian. We are not American. But yeah, so that's kind of why we chose the name.
Yeah, and the reason why we created this YouTube channel and name around ABC is because we truly believe that ABCs have a unique life experience, and this is not always talked about or represented in media. And our mission statement is to create a safe space for people to share their experiences as Asian Canadians and to use this platform to raise awareness about the importance of Asian representation in media.
Yeah, and I feel like, growing up, there was like a cultural disconnect because we were really only exposed to Western forms of media. I didn't interact with Cantonese media at all, besides like when it was on at my grandparents' house, but I had no idea what was going on because obviously I don't speak the language, so there was no way for me to even dive into Cantonese media at all. So all I grew up with was Western media.
Yeah, same. I can relate to that. It's been very interesting growing up because I remember that I didn't really see anyone who looked like me. I didn't see any stories that resonated with mine, and I didn't see my culture being represented. So I remember when I was a kid, I loved everything Disney. I was such a fan of all the princesses. But looking back at it now, Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Belle, Ariel, all of those princesses were white. The only princess, I guess, that was Asian was Mulan, but she was never glamorized or really paid much attention to. And when you say Disney princess, Mulan doesn't really come to mind.
No, like Mulan was like a war hero. It's like she went to war for her family. That's definitely not a typical, I guess, Disney princess story. Um so yeah, like I don't think of Mulan as like a glamorized Disney princess, if a princess at all. So and I think like moving along to like the like when I was a teenager, even like shows then like there wasn't a lot of Asian representation and we definitely were not cast as, main characters. I think like the first show that I watched as a teenager where I saw a strong female Asian lead was Grey's Anatomy, where Christina Yang, she was like one of the surgeons there, and she wasn't. I think a lot of times Asian women are represented as submissive, not as good leaders, and so it was nice to see like Christina Yang as like this strong, independent woman who was a surgeon and she was smart, and it was nice to see that representation. But again, like she was the sidekick to Meredith Grey, who was white. So again, here we're seeing a strong Asian character, but again, they're not the lead. So I feel like we're never in like the center of a show.
Yes, that also reminds me of when I was a teenager because I vividly remember my first experience seeing an Asian person in a mainstream TV show, and that was Glee. So there was the characters Mike and Tina, which if there's any Glee fans out there, I don't know if you even remember these characters very much because they were really secondary background characters and they were not the leads. So kind of like what you were saying with Grey's Anatomy, a lot of these mainstream TV shows lack Asian representation. And the few times that they do have it, we're not centered in the story. We're always like supplementary to something, but never in the central focus of it.
Yeah, like I couldn't tell you the background stories of Mike and Tina. Like I could like Finn and Rachel, like the other main characters. And I think like also what you're saying, like how we're kind of in the background. I think a lot of mainstream TV, like you'll see like a random Asian character, but I think that's where like the term the token Asian comes from. It's just like they throw that like one token Asian in there just to like, yeah, we're diverse. We have a diverse cast, but they don't actually, delve into character development in a lot of Asian characters. But yeah, so I think that's like all for today, but make sure you guys definitely wait for next week's episode where we'll be talking about our experiences with social media and Western beauty standards. It's going to be a really eye-opening conversation, so make sure you don't miss that.
Bye.